So, what is fear really for? Can you dive into risk without totally freaking out? Why has God done these things and set us up in a certain way? That is what we're talking about today. My name is Jeff Holzclaw, and this is the Being With podcast, where we're seeking to integrate neuroscience and faith, and we're brought to you by Grassroots Christianity, which is seeking to grow faith for everyday people. So I'm excited to have a good friend, Jason Clark, with us today. He is the senior pastor of Sutton Vineyard Church in London.
Yeah.
Jason is a doctor and a professor of theology. He also designed and leads the Leadership and Global Perspectives Doctor of Leadership program at Portland Seminary, which is super exciting. He writes and blogs and podcasts at jasonswanclark.org. And he's writing a cool book, which we're not talking about today, but he's writing a book on mental health and faith. Jason, welcome to the Being With.
Hey, great to be with you, Jeff.
Yeah. So we're going to be talking about fear and risk and these types of things. How do these things fit together? Is fear a good thing? Is fear a bad thing? But you and I have known each other for, 15 or 20 years. Back when we were deconstructing and reconstructing our faith in different ways. And
we both had a lot more hair.
That's true. That's true. We had a lot more hair back when we knew each other. We both kind of.
I think it's more like 20 years.
Yeah, I think it is close to 20 years because it's 2011 now. So yeah. So, but then we each got our doctorates, and we've been pastoring, so we kind of, didn't stay as connected. But recently, we reconnected, kind of around this neuroscience and faith and theology. At a pretty high level, because we're both kind of nerds, pastors and theologians. So, but today we're going to kind of keep it a little more accessible, and we're going to be talking about fear. And you were reading a couple different things. So this is a kind of a different episode than some of our other ones where, someone has written a book and I'm just kind of walking them through it. But like, I'm actually going to be more of the learner today, and you're going to be like teaching me about some of these things, and then I'm going to be interjecting. No pressure. So you were reading about Navy SEALs, and it kind of made you go, interesting. So why don't you tell us kind of about this?
Yeah. So in terms of leadership, there's a whole tranche, isn't there, of these books by ex-Navy SEALs, or in the UK, we've got SAS guys who write books on leadership and stuff. And one of my favorites is like Extreme Ownership. They always have the great adjectives like that. But this guy, Jocko Willenick, has written some leadership books. But this article was fascinating because it was about how this ex-Navy SEAL is studying a particular cognitive space and place and practice where Navy SEALs are risk averse. And then he's extrapolating that against, the general public and leadership issues. But the presenting issue, I'm reading it and I'm like, okay, this is fascinating. But what's at the center of this article is what he's studying is, from cognitive science, is that moment when we have an opportunity to do something, but something within us kicks in and makes us resist the action we need to take. Doesn't matter how, it could be a dangerous situation, which often is for a Navy SEAL, but anything to do with opportunity is perceived cognitively as risk. And we have this instinctive response, this tiny space where we pause. And the longer we pause and the longer we take to take action, the less likely we are to take action. And I'm reading this, I'm thinking, this sounds familiar. I don't know what it's like to be a Navy SEAL and have to take some of those actions, but we do know as Christians what it's like to be presented by opportunities and then say no to them. We're both in the same church tradition, and we talk about faith is spelled R-I-S-K, risk. Everything we want is on the other side of fear and risk. So I just found it fascinating that, here again, from at a popular level, but based around neuroscience and understanding is a way to see that place and space where we miss out on things in life because of this reflex that kicks in to say no or pause. I put it really crudely. There are some people in my church who, and I probably have done the same, when they say, I want to pray about it, what they mean is I have no intention of ever doing anything about that thing ever. And again, that place and space, neurocognitively, what happens is the longer we take to take action, the less likely we are to take action. So anyway, that was the article and got me thinking about that.
So why does he say that we hesitate before an opportunity? Is there
Yeah,
what are the
well,
reasons that he fills out? Because I could guess, but I want to know.
well, he's drawing on the science, and that the science would say it is just something that human beings do. It's probably to do with self-preservation. It's a fear instinct. But in the face of really good things and things that we should do, it kicks in. So it's just is. It's just something that's observable and takes place cognitively within us. And the way of dealing with it, which again is you can make immediate links to faith, is to spot that moment. It's about attention on that moment and the resistance, and to use the awareness of the resistance to take action. And then that's got whole loads of correlations with the Christian life. So Saint Ignatius, the idea of acting against, you familiar with that?
I'm actually not. So
Okay.
I'm familiar with Ignatius. I'm familiar with like the examine and the attachments and all those types of things, but the acting against, what is that?
It's absolutely genius. So Ignatius noticed this tendency, and again, so long before cognitive science, Ignatius of Loyola is noticing the tendency of saying no and resisting and not responding to things that God presents us with and invites us into. So the spiritual discipline he developed is called acting against. So the moment I don't feel like doing something, I'm fearful, I'm tired, I resist it, that is the moment when you take action. So you use the attention of that awareness and you use it transformatively. This means take action, not this means don't act. Now again, so Jocko Willink would be saying what they've discovered neuroscientifically is if you start to do that as a practice and take action, you close that space down and become someone who has an instinct and a habit to say yes and take action instead of no and resistance. And I just find it fascinating that Ignatius discovered this long before a Navy SEAL did.
Well, I've been finding that regularly that what cognitive science, neuroscience, behavioral sciences find out to be true about humanity, you can bet that the spiritual traditions had already kind of stumbled upon, if not had outrightly excavated, for human well-being. That just seems to be. Have you experienced that too? That just seems to be shown over and over again.
Yeah, I think, just getting ready for today, thinking, it's 24 years since we planted the church that I'm in. And I've always been fascinated by when you get to teach about spiritual disciplines or habits or anything that says this is the way the world works if you participate with God, that any evidence of that in every other dimension of life, the psychological, the behavioral, you go, yeah, this isn't wishful thinking. This is how human beings are. This is how the world can work. I think it's very empowering to find those connections. And like you say, to see that, Christians, without realizing it intuitively or through just the sheer scale of the practice of billions of Christians over thousands of years, found that there are better ways of living that tap into this environment. And I think that's what's happening now. We've actually got the sciences catching up and able to see that place and space that we couldn't see before.
Yeah, and it definitely lends kind of truth to kind of ancient wisdom that I think, these spiritual traditions have already had. So
Yeah.
for this idea of taking risk and fear, so I would fill out a little bit that why do
Mhm.
we hesitate? We often hesitate because we, at a very basic level, we're kind of wired for preservation.
Mhm.
We're wired to, and by wired I mean like our nervous systems,
Yeah.
our behavior systems are wired to keep us from dying
Mhm.
unexpectedly,
Mm.
and because of that, we're always looking for the worst case scenario. So this good thing
Yeah.
probably isn't as good as I think, or this opportunity is a trap,
Yeah.
or right. So we have all of these kind of, you know, and that's like from us like a real basic
Yeah.
nervous system level. But and then, we've grown up to be disappointed and we've had parents that weren't quite
Mhm.
as, loving or supportive as we thought, right? So then we have all this experiential knowledge
Mhm.
that kind of reinforces that,
Mm.
basic survival kind of instincts and knowledge. So people hesitate uh, for those good things, probably, because they have all this data that says so.
Yeah.
So why should they risk more disappointment? Why, Jason? Why should we risk more disappointment to move forward to grasp that opportunity? Why take the risk? As a pastor, as a theologian, or as a cognitive, researcher, why take the risk?
Well, I like a quote. I'm sure I've heard it from Michael Hyatt, but he may have got it from someone else. Everything we want is on the other side of fear,
Mm-hmm.
and it's true. Um, I mean, if we just trace that, I mean, you're more aware of this than me. Trace fear through the Bible. We're told not to fear, not to be scared. Every time God does something, the first thing He tells us not to do is not be afraid, and calls us to take action around what He brings to us. Now, yeah, the neuroscience shows us how that works, why we're hardwired for preservation and why we do that, and how we can practice differently and be formed differently. I I like the atheological perspective on this, which is it's about recovering who we were meant to be and how we were meant to respond to God. So why would we say no to God? Effectively, that's what we're doing. I mean, none of us consciously say, I say no to God, I refuse him. We
Mm,
just ignore him, we avoid him. That place and space is where God brings opportunities to us about who we are and what our future could become. And we have this reflex of no later. And we're missing out. We're missing out on who we could become. We're missing out on what God would bring into our lives. Um,
ooh,
that would be the
that's
reason to
that's
take
heavy, man. You're preaching there. So saying yes to fear is
yeah,
saying no to God. And, I think was it Zach Williams, or, he
yeah.
has a "Fear is a Liar" song. I don't know
I mean,
I don't
who
know
is
if that's kind of
it?
crossed the pond,
Yeah,
he's
so,
big in
that book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway.
yeah,
Susan Jeffers, wasn't it? Feel the fear and do it anyway. I mean, that
sure.
was a therapeutical book more, and if you want better things in life to achieve who you are and what life is about, you've got to experience fear and take action.
Mm,
Um, and
mhm,
every single story in Scripture is the call into the unknown with risk. You said something interesting about dying, because that's really at the heart of this, isn't it? We fear. What's the old ad? People fear speaking in public. I might die.
mhm.
I don't know anyone who actually has died from public speaking. Literally, I mean, with my kids, I've had moments with my kids where you try and be a good parent, and you see their fear, and you see that place, and you
Mhm,
try and encourage them and say, "It's okay, even if it goes wrong, you won't die." But,
mhm,
but in a way, something is dying, and from a Christian perspective, what is dying to self? It is that place where we want to preserve ourselves, keep ourselves alive, keep ourselves protected. And risk is, and responding to God when he invites us into something and taking action is the way to participate with Christ and to put that part of ourselves to death so that a different us can be formed.
mm,
So again, when cognitive science shows, I love this, when it shows that your brain rewires itself and epigenetically parts of who you are as a human being are switched on by taking action and stepping into risk. It's like, well, of course,
mhm.
because that's the way God made us to be.
Yeah, for sure. So there's a lot to unpack there, which was really great. So I was talking about like this fear of dying, like this literal fear. But we
Yeah.
also have this social fear of dying, of being
Mm.
excluded, of being ridiculed, of being shamed, and, and
Yeah.
that's probably more where the public speaking thing comes in, and,
Yeah.
is I fear social exclusion, the social death, um, and
Yeah.
yet there is that sense in which, as people of faith, um, our biological and even our social lives are not our ultimate destiny, and that's where in Scripture the call or the statement "Do not be afraid" is always just about always coupled with another phrase, which is "I will be with you." God saying, "I will be with you in the midst of this. I will go into the land before you. I'll be in the midst of the fire."
Yeah.
And so the social need as well as the physical survival need, God says, I am there with you. And so you don't need to fear in the midst of that. And to
Mm.
cave into fear
Yeah.
is, in a sense, to, like you said, it's not just saying no to God, it's saying no to the way God has made us. Is that
Mm.
before we jumped on, you said that before the fall, we were made to say yes to God.
Yeah.
And that fear is ways of saying no to God. So could you fill that out just a little bit?
Yeah. Because again, I mean, that's more. I'm not a neuroscientist. I just like to peek over the fence into this stuff. But the theological stuff is more
Yeah.
something I'm familiar with. So human beings were made before God to receive from Him. God would say, "Go here, yes. Do this, yes. Have this in your life, yes." It must have been instinctive in a prelapsarian and in a pre-fallen condition to say, "Yes, God."
Mm-hmm.
So from the fall, we can see many things from the fall, however we understand that happened. So separation from God.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we just take separation from God, which touches on something that you just said, we fear saying yes to God because we believe He won't be there. We
Mm-hmm.
believe we have to protect ourselves. We have to provide for ourselves. And it's actually the opposite. It's saying yes to what God says to us has become a difficult thing to do because of the fall. But if we say yes to it, that's where we discover that God is with us. So why does God have to keep reminding us that He's with us? If God speaks to us and says, "Go here, do this," why would He not be with us?
Mm-hmm.
It's because we have this inbuilt condition that we're on our own. We are isolated, and that all stems from the fall. And you see it in the story with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and immediately hiding from God, and He has to approach them.
Mm-hmm.
Make any
Yeah.
sense?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, when it comes to not just these survival instincts or fear,
Yeah.
the whole process or the whole field of like psychology, neuroscience, cognitive science,
Hmm.
I take this as kind of investigations into our animal nature. That God created us, as the story goes, in Genesis 1, we were created on the sixth day, and
Right.
all the other animals, were created on the outside of the fish and the birds, right? But we'll just
Yeah.
say the mammals were created on the sixth day. And so when we investigate these things, whether it's
Mm.
attachments, whether it's kind of polyvagal theory of your nervous system,
Mhm.
with cognitive science, all psychology, and all the different branches. Excuse me. When you look at all those things, for me, it's like, yeah, we should listen to these things and learn from them.
Mm.
But then theologically, I'd say, but humanity was invited into the seventh day with God in a
Mhm.
way that it seems that the animals were not. And so, what does that mean for, our animal nature
Mhm.
or our survival instincts or whatever evolution has given to us?
Yeah.
Is that the final horizon for understanding what humanity is? And I would say no. And so
Mm.
things like
Absolutely.
the
Yeah.
things you want are only on the other side of fear.
Yeah.
Well, in one sense, animals don't think that way. Like,
Oh,
they'll
yeah.
like
Yeah.
their wants and desires are kind of contained within their fears, and their needs and their necessities, right? And they don't have a horizon that's broader
Yeah.
than those types of things. And so we're created for the seventh day, and that's partly why God says, "Don't be afraid." It's okay to survive. It's okay to respond instinctively to situations that are dangerous, but don't let those become ruminations. Don't let those become advanced plans. Don't let those become working models that control all of our behavior,
Yeah.
because then the fear is going to be. robbing us from those things?
Yeah, and well, my limited understanding, consciousness that human beings have is something that we possess. Our ability to anticipate the future, to make sacrifices for the future, or not,
Mm-hmm.
is unique amongst other creatures. And that is the place and the space where we have consequences to how we anticipate the future and whether we take action or not. And it's into that place and space that God calls us to the future that He has for us. But part of us has to take risks. Part of us has to well, I mean, we have a choice, don't we? Because we can understand the way the world works away from Christianity. Have lots of money, be protected, guarantee things, avoid things. But God's economy, God's kingdom, if it's a real thing and it's activated in the world, we participate in it in a particular way. And for Christians, it's the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. That is God's economy. That is God's existential, ontological reality. And that the doorway into that only opens by saying yes and taking risks.
So you've been a part of the vineyard longer than I have, since I'm a
Yeah,
new guy.
long time.
Let's fill out this idea that faith is spelled R-I-S-K. Like, what was the vineyard trying to get out of that? Or how have you used that or experienced that? Like, how are we linking fear, risk, and what faith is doing for us?
I mean, I think there's some genius in that. So I heard it when I was 19. I'm 52 now. And it was used mostly in the context of praying for people, taking the risk of praying for the sick, and we probably all know that. I mean, just this one issue alone in the Christian life. I mean, many of us probably avoid ever praying for anybody because we're like, I'm not good enough, I'm not qualified, I don't know what to do. So the premise being that God will participate in what we do if we take a risk. The risk of not knowing what to say and not knowing what to do. That the act of the risk of putting your hand on someone and praying does something. God is able to do something that He can't if we stay back here and don't take a risk. And that's genius, but you can extrapolate that into anything and everything else. And in the vineyard, we talk about the kingdom of God, the now and not yet. So how do we step into aspects of the kingdom that break into our life now? Well, they are mostly through risk, through God's invitation, through saying yes to things, taking action around things. And those are all very risky. Well, they seem risky. So planting a church, I mean, that was huge risk. I had a full-time job working in London, and you think you know what you're doing when you're 28 years old and planting a church. But that was a huge risk to know, if we do this thing, what God do. And if I leave my other job, well, I wish I'd gone back to it. So faith is always spelt R-A-S-K.
Yeah. Well, and faith is, giving yourself into that unknown. And so it's out of control. And it's no longer managing outcomes. And that is, that's what fear is kind of wrapped around is, I need to minimize risks, manage outcomes, all these types of things. And so faith is, and on top of that is, however I manage my fear is how I manage my fear. But faith is entrusting yourself to someone else. Faith is giving over responsibility. And that's why it's connected to trust, but that's also why it's connected to hope, and why, Christians have connected it to love. So until we believe that God loves us and that we love God, it's hard to cultivate faith.
And it works at so many levels. So, I mean, think, how we learn to pray for the sick in our church movement. So, the competence cycle, the first section, I don't know what I don't know, then I know what I don't know, and then I have to practice what I don't know, and then I become unconsciously competent. You know that cycle?
Sure.
And again, I mean, every study will show that most people give up when they get to the second quadrant there because they suddenly realize what they don't know, and it's uncomfortable and it's difficult and it's risky and nothing's guaranteed. And the idea that I now have to do something that feels different with no guarantees and all these things you've talked about. What if I look like an idiot? What if I make a mistake? What if something goes wrong? What if I'm not successful? And that's all that place and space where we can often just withdraw and resist. But actually, for growth, we have to take that risk of doing these things, not just once, but again and again and again and again. And again, I love that in the vineyard. You know, the stories we used to tell with John Wimber, our founder. You know, it was like you don't just pray once for someone; you just pray hundreds of times. Keep doing it. And then you're back full circle to the neuroscience of the best way to break through these barriers is to do these things again and again and again and again.
Push through the resistance, fail forward, as some of the slogans go. So then to put you on the spot, what is one of the riskiest things you've done recently?
One of the riskiest things I've done recently. Oh man. level of risk. All
right. Well, I'll start then.
Go on, you start. You really stumped me with that question.
Well, you know, as an Enneagram 3,
okay.
And we haven't talked about Enneagram, but I like to be perceived as competent and
Okay.
successful.
All right.
So, just for the audience, so I like to be perceived as competent and successful, in the know. I hate looking stupid.
Okay.
Things like that. So when I was pressing into kind of more of life in the spirit, you know, I started hearing these things from the vineyard, like faith is spelled R-A-S-K.
Yeah.
I had to start doing things that had the potential of making me look like an idiot.
Okay.
Beyond just praying for people, beyond or just praying for someone's healing, which is, you know, kind of risky. So I entered into the practice of praying for friends, pastoral friends, and asking God to give me a word of encouragement, a specific word that I would write down, and then I would text to them about it. And sometimes it would be very specific, like it'd be a very specific image, or a prayer request or something like that. And so half the time, these people would respond back with thanks, which meant, okay, that was weird. And then the other half, people responded back with, oh, that really connected with me. I have a friend who's struggling with cancer, or I have a work situation that's really stressful, and that really speaks to me. And so, but I had to get that 50% of success where it's like, I actually feel like God maybe was speaking through me to encourage someone else. I had to push through that 50% failure rate of looking stupid in front of pastor friends that I want to respect me because I have a doctorate, you know, and I train other pastors. I don't want to look stupid.
Yeah.
And so, but that skill of, you know, listening from God, receiving words of encouragement, is something that I'm still growing in. But that's been a couple years of taking risks and looking stupid, you know, and the Vineyard and other charismatic churches will do things like calling illnesses out from the stage. And that's risky because then you have to sit there and be like, well, if nobody has a hurting right knee, although that's an easy one. Someone in a group of 100 people, someone's got a hurting right knee, so that's kind of safe. But you know, like an eye problem. So anyhow, those are some of the risks that I've been pressing into.
Yeah, which can sound like small things, but are actually huge because they're the things that you just, you know, where does it feel like you're going to die? So one for me, I mean, I'll tell you a couple. Well, let's use the Enneagram 9. So you mentioned the Enneagram. I'm an Enneagram 4 with a strong 3 wing. And I have a tendency, because of my past, to feel like if I just work a bit harder and longer, I can keep life under control. Now, COVID has been a huge pressure for all of us. And I have had to act against my instinct, which is if I do some more emails, if I have some more meetings, if I can manage or control my way out of this. And I felt God say to me, I needed to surrender. I needed to take a risk. And that was to just spend more time with him. which I know can sound crazy, but for people, for people who are contemplative and like spending lots of time with God, that's pretty straightforward. But for, you're a 3, if you've got an activist tendency, you think if it's to be, it's up to me.
Yeah.
So for the last few months to start my day early and just go, if I do nothing else, I'm going to spend time in prayer and believe that changes things. That has been scary for me. I mean, just saying it out loud sounds stupid because you're a pastor. Of course, you're supposed to pray. But do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Why would it be scary to do the thing that you're supposed to do as a Christian in the first place?
Right.
So that's been one. That's been one for me. I've got a friend who became a Christian. Now, this one does scare me if I hadn't have taken this action. So, have you heard of Alpha, the Alpha course?
Yeah.
So it's huge over here, and our church is inviting people. I stand up as a senior pastor and say, "Great, we want to be able to invite all our friends and people onto the Alpha course." And then I go home and I feel like God says to me, "Well, who are you going to invite?" Like, me? Oh, I thought everyone else in church was going. And I'm like, okay. So I'm at a sports club I'm at, and I've got a good guy who's a friend there. And I did the thing of I prayed and went, God, who would you like me to invite to Alpha? And this guy came to mind. I mean, he was the most stroppy atheist, even though he was a good friend, giving me a hard time about Christianity. And I thought, there is no way I can talk to this man and invite him to Alpha. So do you know how I boldly invited him? I put an invitation together and snuck up to his house to put it through his letterbox to try and think. I mean, this is my boldness.
Yeah.
Would I have died? I mean, I'm a prime example. Would I have died if I'd have talked to him about Jesus and invited him to Alpha? No. So I run up and I put this through the letterbox. And as I'm running away from his house, he opens the window and he says, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm inviting you to this thing called Alpha. You probably will hate it and won't want to come to it." And I literally only did that so I could go home and feel that I had done something. Now, here is where God is good. And he takes the risks that we take. So despite the insufficiency, that was a pretty paltry attempt to respond to God prompting me, wasn't it? What he then taught, and he came to Alpha, became a Christian. He was actually at home at that moment praying. He hadn't prayed since he was a kid. And he was going through, and he was like at the end of life in himself. And he's like, God, if you're there, I need an invitation from you to something. And then I walk up and put this through his door.
Love it.
Firstly, isn't it amazing that the little risk I took, God multiplies? But secondly, what my friend, he has been utterly transformed. He has met Jesus. I mean, it's just astonishing. And that scares me more now than not taking a risk, because I'm like, if I had not done that, what would have happened? I mean, and actually, you met a wonderful woman in our church recently. They've got married. It's just, so I think that's the way and then we talk about that, don't we? Trading risks. There is always the risk. If I give into that risk, I'm risking missing what God might want to do. So I've gotten a lot bolder. That's helped me. You know, that place and space now. I mean, it's not been less successful. I've invited more people to Alpha, and some of them have come, but they haven't become Christians. But at least now, when I find that moment of, oh, I can't ask, I'm like, oh, this is it. This is that thing. I need to ask them.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Well, thanks for sharing that. Well, thank you so much, Jason, for being on today. For all the listeners, Jason and I we're trying to scheme different ways, maybe not on this Being With podcast, but different ways of kind of talking about the higher level pastoral, theological, and neuroscience kind of conversations. So be sure to stay tuned for that. A way to never miss any of our Being With kind of updates, podcasts, as well as blog posts, because I'm blogging through different neuroscience books that aren't exactly on the podcast. But please join our Being With community. You can find that in the show notes, on emails. You can find me on Facebook and YouTube and these other places. So stay tuned for that. Also, Jason is, I just want to plug again his Leadership and Global Perspectives Doctoral of Leadership at Portland Seminary. So you can kind of Google that, Leadership of Global Perspectives. You can find Jason. His online name is Jason Swan Clark. You can find jasonswanclark.org. So thank you so much, Jason. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure. It's been great to be with you, Jeff. Thank you.
All right, we will talk to you all later. Be sure to like, subscribe, share this podcast on YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Facebook, wherever you might subscribe or share things. Please do, because there's no other way that people are going to find out about it, because this is not a high-paid adventure. This is just me and a microphone and people that I find really interesting. So please get the word out. And again, we're produced and brought to you by Grassroots Christianity.